Defense pick up one touchdown. Kick game pick up one touchdown. We got this game won.
Welcome back to Skuchdown Report, an all-inclusive deep dive into the inner workings of the Chase Estates Fantasy Football League. I'm your host, Austin, aka A-Dub, and today I have with me a very special guest. He's a very grumpy old man, and I got him in my shirt today. Let me go grab him, hold on. Jerry Maurice Bullock. Go ahead and say hello to the people, let them know how you're feeling today. How's things been with you? You doing alright? Yeah? Miss me? Okay. I'm gonna do the podcast, alright? Okay. Shout out to that boy, Jerry. Okay, enough boring, you guys. Let's put our hats on straight and let's talk some fantasy football. So today's episode is going to be a great episode, mainly because we're kind of far enough into the season where we can figure out how everyone's team's looking. We're starting to get a painted picture of what every team looks like and what their outlook's going to be for the season. And on the flip side of that, everything kind of just got turned on its head. And by everything, I'm really just talking about my team, because Javonte Williams is now out. We'll talk about it later. Some key injuries. There's a lot of things going on around the league. But let's get right into it, and let's talk about some news. Jerry clearly wants to be on the podcast. Can you see him playing back here? Well, he's just going to be in the background the whole episode. Nothing I can do about it. So the first segment we're going to talk about is news, and there's some pretty interesting stuff going on around the league. I'm going to start off with White Teddy Two Gloves himself, Kenny Two Gloves Pickett. So Kenny Pickett just got announced today as the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that's interesting for a couple reasons. In terms of fantasy, it's interesting because Deontay Johnson hadn't been very relevant up until now. Kenny Pickett threw 3 picks in his first game back, but he looks to be more impressive than Mitchell Trubisky, at least more of an upside than Mitchell Trubisky. There's a few other players on that team that have kind of been a nobody. Chase Claypool, the young rookie receiver, also has been kind of irrelevant up until this point fantasy-wise. Najee Harris has had a good year, but the Steelers are definitely going to be on an uptick moving forward with Kenny Pickett, I believe, moving forward. Breaking news from Washington, D.C. Carson Wentz stinks. Get him out of here, dude. What are we doing? Cancel the entire Washington season. We are utterly trash. We are so bad. We get Chase Young back next week. Brian Robinson might be starting pretty soon. Look out for him. I think he's on someone's bench. But overall, who really cares? The Patriots are now moving to Mac Jones 3.0 in Jeremiah McGillicuddy, who is their new starting quarterback. Yeah, it looks like Mac Jones may be back sooner than later, so it's possible that Charles McGillicuddy will make the cut for the next week or two. So maybe this is just a run-heavy team until Mac Jones comes back, at which point they will become slightly less of a run-heavy team, but more of a run-heavy team with Mac Jones. In other news, the New York Giants are now 3-1. They are looking to make it to the Super Bowl after Daniel Jones went out with an apparent head injury and then came back into the game. Saquon Barkley is a better quarterback from what we can tell from the last couple plays run, but the New York Giants, like I said last episode, are primed for a fall. Watch out for it. Sorry, Dan Wagon fan, it's going to happen. Getting to the West Coast, the Oakland Raiders, now the Las Vegas Raiders, did get their first win against Russell Wilson and the stinky Broncos. The Raiders looked okay. They're going to be an exciting team for fantasy. Their defense is atrocious, so I would look to start any player playing against the Las Vegas Raiders. However, they do get a win. Congratulations to Las Vegas. No one here is even a real fan, so I'll say congratulations to Oakland. Special shout out to Josh Jacobs, who had one of his best fantasy games, I believe, of his entire career on Kyle's bench. I'm trying to touch on all the teams that our league mates actually like, so I'm going to get to Florida Man. We'll talk really fast about the Jacksonville Jaguars, who look to be a very good team. However, they did lose it to the Washington Commanders. So the verdict is still out on them. They did play a tough Eagles team this week and lost in the Doug Peterson Bowl. However, I'm not sure if Matty Will is even a fan of them. Hopefully he's not a fan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as Tom Brady lost a very good game against Patrick Mahomes. I don't know if it's the Bucs' year. In terms of fantasy, they're definitely still relevant. Mike Evans went completely off. However, Florida Matt, whichever team you're rooting for, it's not looking good, my friend. Let's get to Nico. I believe Nico is a Philadelphia Eagles fan, so congratulations to him. He has a very good-looking team. Jalen Hurts is still flying. That team looks like they are definitely going to make a run at the Super Bowl this year. Congratulations to you. It's, I think, in week 5 or 6, you already have the NFC East locked up, from what I can tell. So I just remembered, Matty Will is one of many fake Cowboys fans. So congratulations on your win this week against the worst team in NFL history in the Washington Commanders. With Carson Wentz at the helm, I think you guys get Dak Prescott back. However, Cooper Clutch is 4-0 as a starter. So a possible step down there from Cooper Clutch to Fart Prescott, who will look to make his first start next week. I'm not really sure who Mike likes as a team, so I believe he's in New Jersey right now. So we'll just talk about the Jets for a second, who did get a win. They ruined all of my parlays, seeing as though I had the Pittsburgh Steelers winning. But never trust Mitchell Trubisky. He will no longer be the starting quarterback. The Jets Jets get another win, and Zach Wilson so far has the best white man gritty of the season. Congratulations to the Jets. Getting to Colton's favorite team, which I believe is the Patriots. However, looking a little bit deeper into our fantasy past, the Cincinnati Bengals were his team name. So we'll talk about the Cincinnati Bengals in that game. They played on Thursday night and beat the Dolphins. That was the only game that I won money on. I saw that coming a mile away. Joe Shiesty was in the Icy Whites. Never bet against Joe Shiesty in the Icy Whites. That team looked good. The Dolphins look like who I think they are. Moment of silence for Tua. Me and Kyle said it on our podcast, but he shouldn't have been out there. I was extremely scared watching that game. I'm glad he's better. Hopefully he doesn't play for a few weeks, and by a few, I mean a lot of weeks. Dolphins do have Teddy Two Gloves as a backup. He looks like he'll be fine over there. All the fantasy players over there will be fine. But congratulations to the Cincinnati Bengals. They did get a win last week, I believe, too. So they now have 2 wins. Trying to get back to that Super Bowl form. We'll see how that goes. Congratulations to Zach and the Atlanta Falcons this week. They did get a big win against the Cleveland Nick Chubbs. That was a trap game from day one. I saw it. I called that. I got that on my parlay. I'm pretty excited about it. But congratulations to Marcus Mariota. He gets a win. I think the verdict's still out on the Falcons. I don't know if they're really a good or a bad football team. I think they are the definition of an average football team. But congratulations to Zach and the Atlanta Falcons. And then I think this is just an overarching statement for pretty much everyone in this league that likes the New England Patriots. They almost won in Green Bay. I spoke about it earlier. Charles McGillicuddy almost had to come back. He looked a little frazzled out there. However, they almost won. They took it to overtime. Aaron Rodgers did end up getting the win there. But the Patriots look like if Bill Belichick's your coach, you're not canceled. He's not going anywhere. Bill Belichick is still a great coach, and you're still going to be in any game. They'll be okay moving forward. I definitely don't see them making the playoffs. However, they'll probably make every game interesting and give you a heart attack at the end. But Mac Jones will be back in a couple weeks. You guys will be all right and back to mediocre. Tennessee Tom, although he is a Patriots fan, we will talk about the Titans, who did get a good win this week against the Indianapolis Colts. Unlucky for Tom, the Indianapolis Colts do not look like what we thought they would be. Their main back, Jonathan Taylor, looked to get a little banged up at the end of that game. I think he had his lowest point scoring in the history of him being in the NFL. So that's a big reason why Tom struggled this week. And moreover, it's a bigger reason as to why he's been struggling on the year. Jonathan Taylor has not been what we thought he was going to be as the consensus number 1 overall pick across pretty much every fantasy football league. Derrick Henry did have a good game back. He's looking like he's the moose we always thought he was going to be. I think Treylon Burks did go out hurt. We'll talk about injuries in a second, but Bobby Trees is looking to lead that wide receiver group. But the Tennessee Titans get a good win against the mediocre Indianapolis Colts. Congratulations to Tennessee Tom and the entire Tennessee state. And I think that pretty much covers all of the most important teams. I'm not going to touch on every game, just want to touch on the ones that we care about the most. I did speak about them earlier. We'll just brush past it. I think Washington's probably the worst team in the league, and possibly in league history. We'll look into that more once the year goes on, but I think Commander Carson is not the answer. He's getting paid a lot of ducats to go out there and get sacked 9 times. Find your goddamn check down, my friend, and get that ball to J.D. McCoos. So getting into the next segment, we're going to talk about some of the key injuries this week. The first one I'm going to start off with was on Thursday. We spoke about it before. But Tua Tagovailoa, I think I'm butchering his name, Tua Tagovailoa went out with a second concussion in 5 days. It was a scary sight. The entire nation was watching on Thursday when he looked like he got his brain absolutely mushed into 2 pieces. I feel bad for him. I do not think he should have been out there. Me and Kyle said that we don't think he should have been out there. I think there'll be more to the story later. I think there's an investigation ongoing, but he was carted off the field in what looked to be a homicide. Hit the back of his head. He is going to be out. Teddy Bridgewater, the veteran's going to come in and start in his place. Hopefully Tua gets back and is fine. And hopefully moving forward in his career, he's fine, because that looked like something that could be ongoing for more than one football season, you know? So thoughts and prayers out to Tua. Hopefully he's doing well, and hopefully he gets back healthy. Secondly, we have Cordero Patterson. Cordero Patterson was hurt in the game against the Browns. So right now they're reporting Cordero is going to miss the next 4 games, which does suck for him and the Falcons, as he was one of the only bright spots on that team. Hopefully that means more targets for Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts has been struggling so far this year. He's one of the reasons Zach's team has been doing really well, so his team takes a hit with Cordero out. He still has a few good running backs over there, but Cordero will be out for the foreseeable future. It does not look like the Falcons are going to get any better with him leaving. The next player we have, sad to say, it's Javonte Williams. He was my assumed keeper for next year. I did draft him in the first round, and I was turning down trade offers for him earlier in the season because I truly believed he was going to be a generational talent who was going to take my team to the next step, not even this year, but the next year and years moving forward. However, he looks to have suffered a very bad knee injury. I was reading somewhere earlier before that he tore his ACL, MCL, and PCL. Typically, when someone hurts their knee, it's just a torn ACL. So the fact that they defined all 3 of those CLs is not looking good for Javonte Williams moving forward. He is obviously going to be going on injury reserve, and he is out for the season. They don't even know if he's going to be back for week 1 next year. Brutal loss for my team. This quite literally turns my team on its head, and we'll see how I do moving forward. I don't think this is going to help me out. I do think this is the first piece to fall of my team. I mentioned every episode before that I was going to live and die by the Denver Broncos, and now that 3-way pie chart of mine has been cut to 2, which is now Cortland Sutton and Russell Fartson. So I don't know if I like this moving forward. I think I'm going to be a King Goffrey guy moving forward, but hate to see Javonte Williams go down. Even if you don't like him in fantasy football, he looked to be a really good running back, but super sad to see him go out. Next is going to be Jonathan Taylor. This is Tom's marquee player, and Jonathan Taylor was hurt late with an ankle injury. And I don't know if it's going to be as serious as like a Javonte Williams or a Cordero Patterson, but it's definitely something to point out. Seeing as though he was already struggling this year, I don't think this is going to help him out. I think he'll be out, I believe, 2 weeks, because I think they have their bye week in 3 weeks. That's just me taking a guess, but you hate to see Jonathan Taylor go out. I believe Marlon Mack is their backup. I don't know if anyone has him on their team or if he's even worth a pickup, but a good shout out there. Hate to see Jonathan Taylor go down. I do think he'll have a good back end to his season, so Tom, I wouldn't necessarily trade him cheap. I think he's worth keeping. Having said that, though, this is Tom's last year keeping Jonathan Taylor, so if there ever was a time to offload him, might be now. Throw in some trades, you guys. Let's see what he thinks. After that, we have Daniel Jones. Sorry, Dan Wagon fan, but your god has gone down. So Daniel Jones went out in the middle of the game and then actually came back during the game, but he was kind of used as a decoy. I think he played wide receiver for like 4 or 5 plays while Saquon Barkley played quarterback. I got to say, after watching that game, it was pretty brutal. It was versus the Bears, and that was essentially like a game from 1942. I mean, I think the ball was run over 100 times, and Daniel Jones essentially was a glorified running back at quarterback, and at the end when they put Saquon Barkley in, I was like, why not just have Saquon play quarterback? You know, it can't be much worse. I have no idea who the Giants' backup is, but I'm sure he's not as good as Charles McGillicuddy from the New England Patriots. However, Daniel Jones did sustain an ankle injury on Sunday's win over the Bears. Dayball has said that he's feeling a little bit better today. No one knows what the hell that means, but Tyrod Taylor is the backup there. He is a journeyman. We'll see how he does. I don't really think the Giants are going anywhere anyways, but sad to see Daniel Jones go out. I don't think he was on anyone's team, but a good injury to note for Dan Wagon. Sorry about that, my friend. Maybe you have to change your team name now. We'll see. Next, we have Treylon Burks, and Treylon Burks was carted off the field. It seems to be just a turf toe. which makes sense why he couldn't walk off. But I don't think it's as serious as like a Javonte Williams or like, a Tua. I think it's something he can return from. Obviously, that'll be a super nagging injury. I don't know if Treylon Burks was on anyone's team, but he was a young, promising wide receiver that possibly takes a step back now and may not have the killer first-year season like everyone was expecting. Robert Woods is the second wide receiver there, first wide receiver now. This was always a run-heavy team to begin with, but you hate to see Treylon Burks go down. He was on my watch list as someone to look forward to next year. Maybe now you might have to wait for that. Another one you hate to see, Jahan Dotson, rookie receiver, gets a hamstring injury. It's going to keep him out for about 1 to 2 weeks. He plays for the Washington Commanders. He does have 4 touchdowns up until this point. He's played well. He had 1 down week, but he has been one of the bright spots on the Commanders team. And you hate to see him go down, honestly, because of all the young rookie wide receivers, he's been the only one producing. And honestly, out of everyone on the Commanders offense, he's kind of been the only one producing. So you hate to see him go down. But maybe this will give some room for Terry McLaurin to actually shine and to be that wide receiver 1 that you drafted him to be. You're going to need to rely on Carson Wentz for that to happen. So I don't know if that's the best thing you want to bet right now. But Jahan Dotson does go out. I'm super sad about it. You hate to see it, but the Washington Commanders will look to move forward with Curtis Samuel and Terry McLaurin. We'll see how that goes for them. So the next section that we're going to be talking about here is Week 4 matchups. We're going to be going over who won and who lost, starting with myself versus Mike. I don't know if I'm going to flash all the scores up, seeing as that takes me a long time, and I'm trying to get this video out before I go to sleep. So I'll just give you guys a general rundown of what happened in each game and give you what to look forward to next week. So in my matchup between Mike was coming in undefeated. He remained undefeated. He beat me 103-92. Some of his top performers were Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, and Breece Hall. Mike Evans absolutely killed me Sunday night. I think he had almost 20 points in the first half. However, going into Monday night, I believe I was up by, I think it was 6 or 8 points, and I had the Rams defense, and he had Brandon Ayuk and Matt Gay. And Brandon Ayuk only had 5.7 points, so I would have won that matchup had it not been for kickers being in the league, which I hate, by the way. Matt Gay put up 9 points on my dome piece and ruined any hope I had of going 2-2. My team falls to 1-3. You hate to see it. So my top 3 scorers were Fart Wilson, Chris Olave, and Cortland Sutton. Again, the Denver Broncos are the true lifeblood of my team, which you hate to see, but they did not help me out this week, and I did get the loss to Mike. Next game we have up is the Barack Obamas versus the replacements, Matty Will versus Colton here. Colton did get the win. He won 109-101, taking him to 3-1, being one of the strongest teams in the league, and Matty Will fall to 2-2 in that middle tier. Some of Colton's best starts were Joe Burrow with 20 points, Cooper Kupp with 19 points, and Jerry Jeudy with 13 points. His team was very consistent. Everyone on his team performed pretty well. The only down spot to his week was the Jacksonville Jaguars playing Philadelphia. I don't know if he really drops them. I think he was ready to risk it this week. They only got 3.7, but besides that, across the board, it was a very good week for him. His whole entire team did well. Good for him. He had a good week. And on the other side, you had Matty Will. And Matty Will's top 3 scores were Tom Brady with 25.4, Derrick Henry with 22.2, and the New York Giants defense with 16 points. Matty Will had a few sad performances here, one of them being Kyle Pitts. You hate to see it. One of the backbones of his teams. Garrett Wilson also had 5.1 points, and Jalen Waddle only had 4.9 points after 2 went out. So had it not been for those 3 guys, Matty Will might have won this game. He didn't have too much on the bench to help him out, but you hate to see those performances from those guys. Shout out to his defense getting into his top 3. But Matty will lose that game. Colton wins. Good win for Colton. He's looking to be one of the stronger teams moving into Week 5. The next game we have is Captain Phillips versus Tegrity Farm Towels. This is Chris versus Dan. First thing I want to say is, who is Chris? I meant to say Nugget. I apologize. Nugget's top 3 scores were Justin Jefferson with 26 points, Garrett Everett with 14.6 points, and M. Wright. Who is this guy? Matthew Wright. Ew, 12 points. Kicker. You hate to see it, Nugget. What's going on? Nugget does lose the game, though. Dan won 107-81. I believe this is the 3rd week in a row Nugget has not put up 100 points. I am also down there with him, too. I think I might be in the toilet bowl this year, you guys. I think I'd see it coming. But Dan's top 3 scores were Miles Sanders with 28.6, the absolute dagger. Josh Allen had 23.4, and the San Francisco defense had 21 points on Monday night. The Rams looked terrible. But yeah, looking at Nuggets team, James Robinson didn't come through for him on his first week on the team. Trevor Lawrence also only had 5.5. In general, the Jacksonville Jaguars let him down this week. Rashad Bateman only had 3.2 points. Tony Pollard only had 1.3. Pretty much a bad game across the board for Nugget. Justin Jefferson definitely kept him afloat with 26. Gerald Everett had 14, like I said before, but rough week for Nugget. He still put up 81 points with all his bad performances, though, so not too bad of a week. Shout out to his kicker, Matthew Wright. Sorry for forgetting your name, Matt. And Dan's team was just great across the board, really. I mean, he did have Cam Akers, who he traded for with Nugget, who had 1.3, so Nugget got that guy off his team, and he's stinking up someone else's squad. He also had Deontay Johnson with 3.2 and Darren Waller with 3.9. Curtis Samuel had 5.8, so really top-heavy win for Dan. I mean, a lot of his team didn't perform very well. He also didn't have much on the bench. But Nugget did have some good players on the bench. I think he could have won this game had he started everyone perfectly. But you're never going to start a perfect lineup. I'm not going to fault him for that. He does fall to 0-4, and I believe he is the only 0-4 team now. And Dan will go to 3-1, kind of in that upper tier of teams. Getting into the next team, it's Nico versus Godin's Grinders. This is Kyle versus Nico. And Nico got the win. He actually had the most points for the week. He had 137 to Kyle's 113. You hate to see it, Kyle. Kyle's first really good week. He lost to the top point scorer. But going over Nico's team here, his top point scorers were TJ Hawkinson with 34.9 points. I think I read somewhere that was like either the 4th or 5th best tight end appearance since they started tracking fantasy football. So TJ Hawkinson absolutely dunked on the Seahawks and helped Nico win. Jamal Williams also put up 23.4 points. The Lions really helped Nico get this win here. And Kyler Murray put up 22.8. Some of Kyle's top performers were Dameon Pierce with 22.9 points. CeeDee Lamb came alive with 18.7 points. And Jalen Hurts had an average game for his standards at 15.8 points. So looking at the game in general, Nico had a very top-heavy week. He did have some bad performances from his kicker and defense. But other than that, everyone on his team was kind of doing very well. Even Stephon Diggs had 8 points. I mean, Nico really could have popped off this week. So a good win for him. And on the flip side, Kyle had a good week as well. I mean, you hate to get 2.5 points from Terry McLaurin. Christian Kirk only had 7.3. I do want to point out that he had Josh Jacobs on the bench, and I do believe he would have won had he started him over Christian Kirk. So a disappointing loss for Kyle. Kyle will fall to 1-3. He's going to be down there with me. And Nico will go to 2-2 in that middle tier of teams going into week 5. The next game we have is Tennessee State versus Dan Wagon Fan. This is Tom versus Dan. And Dan Wagon Fan did win this game 114-89. T-Mac's going to fall to 0-4 down there with Nugget. And Dan Wagon's going to move to 3-1 up there in the top tier of teams going into week 5. Some of Tom's best performance were Patrick Mahomes with 23.2 points, Deebo Samuel on Monday night with 20.7, and the Philadelphia defense with 15 points. Dan Wagon had a great week. Austin Eckler led the way with 31.9 points. DK Metcalf had 18.4 points and 1 poop. Aaron Rodgers had 16.1 points. But overall, a good win for Dan Wagon. His team did pretty well across the board. His defense only put up 1 point with the Broncos against Las Vegas. That was a rough outing for them. But besides that, everyone on his team did pretty well. Juju Smith-Schuster's never really going to get you over 7. Najee Harris is pretty sad at 7.4. I do think Najee Harris improves with Kenny Two Gloves next week. We'll see how that goes. And on Tom's side of the ball, disappointing outing from Jonathan Taylor. We talked about it before, 2.8 points. Drake London also only had 2.7 points. He had been doing well for Tom up until this point. Devontae Smith also only had 3.2 points. He had been killing it up until this week. George Kittle on Monday night only had 3.4 points. He had like 35 blocks, though, so shout out to him blocking. But overall, a pretty bad week for Tom. He had 2 or 3 players do really well. I believe his kicker and defense put up more points than like 6 other players on his team. So he'll look to improve next week. Him and Nugget are currently down there at 0-4. Dan Wagon moves to 2-2 in that middle tier of players. And the last game of the week was Kareem Pie versus Copo's second boyfriend. This is the swing set affair with Zach and Jim down there. Zach did get the win with 133 points to Jim's 95 points. Some of his top performers were Clyde Edwards-Helaire with 21.9 points, Travis Kelce with 19.7 points, really leaning into that Chiefs offense. Nick Chubb had 19.7 points against the Falcons. He was his 3rd best scorer. Compared to Dan's top 3 scores of T. Higgins with 21.9 on Thursday night, Christian McCaffrey with 21.3 points. He finally came alive. and Saquon Barkley with 17.2 points. So overall, looking at this game, Zach's team has been keeping up a really good pace this year. You hate to see it. Zach is basically the Senator Palpatine of this league at this point. You know, he has unlimited power. His bench and his team is doing well, and no one can stop him. And you also can't stop him from talking shit in the group chat. However, you can silence it, though. I don't know if you guys know that. There's a little button at the top you can silence him, and you don't have to hear from Zach again. Something I've been practicing for a few years now. However, good week for Zach. He had a good game across the board. Really, his entire team played really well. His bench even played well. So I can't take anything away from him there. However, Jim really did have a rough week. Michael Pittman only had 4.6 points for him. That entire Indianapolis offense kind of stalled last week, and you hate to see it. Matthew Stafford had an absolute stinkfest on Monday Night Football. He had 6.6 points. I don't think Jim was ever going to make it to 133 to beat him, but I'm sure he had some hope. And Matthew Stafford really killed that hope, throwing 3 interceptions, I believe, on Monday night. David Njoku had 7.2. Amari Cooper only had 1.4. So some bad performances for Jim. He still got to 95 points, though, so a good week for him. I think he even would have beat me even with this hobbled team. So next week, the standings are going to look something like this. Mike's going to be on top, being 4-0. After that, we're going to have Colton at 3-1. We're going to have Zach at 3-1. We're also going to have Dan Wagon Fan at 3-1. So those 4 teams are making up the top 4 teams. So the next tier down, we're going to have Matty Will, who's going to be 2-2. Nico is also going to be 2-2. And Jim is also going to be 2-2. So that makes up the next 3 players there, rounding off our top 7 players. And then looking at the bottom of the league, you have myself there. I'm going to be 1-3. Also, Kyle's going to be down there in the 1-3 teams. So that's going to be your next set of teams there. And then at the bottom of the league, it's going to be Tom and T-Mac being 0-4. I don't think either of those teams end up being at the bottom by the end of the year. We'll talk about trades next, but I do think both of those teams are strengthened by some of the trades made this week. But that takes us to our next segment, which is Trade Talk. And I wanted to talk about this for a little while because in years past, there's been not very much movement in terms of trades, in terms of wheeling and dealing. But I was happy to see a lot of movement this week around the league for players getting moved for the better or for the worst. So the most recent trade at time of recording this was Deebo Samuel for James Robinson. T-Mac did get Deebo, and Nugget got James Robinson. I mentioned in the group chat earlier that Tom really got a discount on Deebo Samuel because Nugget was 0-3 and also because Deebo couldn't be kept. I do think Tom won that trade overall. I don't know if James Robinson sustains his production through the first 4 weeks. However, I understand the trade for both sides, and I do think that does help Nugget out in the immediate future. I don't know if by the end of the season James Robinson is still the running back 1 in Jacksonville, but I do think it helps him get a win in the next couple of weeks. I also play Nugget next week, and I do think James Robinson's going to go off on me. So something to look into, but overall, a great trade. I do think Tom won that trade, and I understand the reasons behind both of them. The next trade we had here is also from Captain Phillips. Captain Phillips really shook things up on his team this week, and I'm proud of him for getting rid of some of these players, for better or for worse. He did get rid of Cam Akers, who was the laughing stock of the league after putting up 0 points the first week. He moves over to Tegrity Farm Towels, which is Dan's team. And in return, Nugget does get Jahan Dotson. And we mentioned earlier Jahan Dotson went out with an injury. You hate to see it. I do understand the trade, though, for Nugget, though. He's really looking into the future. Jahan Dotson might turn out to be a keeper-level player. I don't know. Maybe that's just me being a little biased. But you do hate to see Jahan Dotson go down for him. On the other side, though, I don't think you lose much in Cam Akers. I mean, we saw it on Dan's team. I think Cam Akers put up like 2 points this week. So I think it's a win on Nuggets' behalf. I know it's a immediate loss because he doesn't have a running back anymore and Jahan Dotson can't play. However, I do think moving forward, Jahan Dotson holds more value than Cam Akers. But an overall even trade, I would say there. Obviously, I think in the immediate future, I think Dan did win that trade, seeing as he has 1 healthy player and Nugget has 0 healthy players. But I do think in the future, moving forward, I do think Nugget wins that trade overall. Time will tell. I think I'm a little bit of a homer, but good trade, Nugget. I think Jahan Dotson's a good trade. So those are the only 2 concrete trades that we had in our league. But I will tell you this. For my team alone, there's been trades coming in and out, just flying both ways in terms of who we're trying to trade for. So in this segment, I'm going to go through everyone's team, and I'm going to give a hypothetical trade situation to see if we can get more movement around the league, and if I see trade value in people's teams, and if other people value these players more than their own players. So the next segment we're going to get into is the weekly MVPs, and we're going to start off with our quarterbacks of the week. Our QB1 of the week was Geno Smith. Geno Smith had 31.7 points. He threw for 320 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also carried the ball 7 times for 49 yards and 1 touchdown. So he is looking like Russell Wilson in Seattle, and Russell Wilson is looking like Geno Smith. We are truly in the upside down. I do want to give a special shout out to Jared Goff, who had 31.1 points and just barely missed out on QB1. King Goffrey will be starting for me next week, Nugget. I hope you are ready to bend the knee. Getting to our running backs, our RB1 for the week was Josh Jacobs, who had 32 points. He had 28 carries, which I believe led the entire NFL, for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. Actually, I do want to throw out there, Saquon Barkley did run the ball 31 times, so it wasn't the most rushes, but it was the second most rushes, and the most rushes he's ever had in a single game in his whole career. He also had 5 receptions for 31 yards on 6 targets. Shout out to Josh Jacobs and the Las Vegas Raiders for getting their first win. He had 32 points. He balled out. RB2 of the week was Austin Eckler, finally coming back to life there. He had 31.9 points, missing out on RB1 by 0.1 points. You hate to see it. However, he did have 13 carries for 60 yards and 2 touchdowns. Adding to that, he had 6 receptions for 49 yards and 1 touchdown on 7 targets. So that Chargers offense is really looking to bounce back. Austin Eckler is going to have to play well for them to do well, and he did just that in Week 4. Shout out to Austin Eckler, our RB2 for the week. Wide receiver 1 for the week was Mike Evans. He played a major role into why I lost this week. He had a monster game on Sunday night with Tom Brady. He had 8 receptions for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 10 targets and had 26.3 points. He was balling out, dude. I do think Mike Evans is going to be a baller moving forward this year, but good game for him. Coming in at wide receiver 2 was Justin Jefferson. He was across the pond this week. He got 26 points. I don't know if you guys are up early to watch the game, but he had 1 carry for 3 yards and 1 touchdown. He is now the goal line running back there, apparently. He also had 10 receptions for 147 yards on 13 targets. So shout out to Justin Jefferson coming back to life a little bit across the pond against the Saints. He had a good week. Our tight end 1 for the week was TJ Big Hawk Hawkinson, dude. He had a great week. TJ Hawkinson had 34.9 points. He had 12 targets in this game. He had 8 receptions for 179 yards and 2 tugs. He was absolutely balling against the Seahawks, dude. He had such a great game. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I could be wrong. I think this was either the 4th or 5th best fantasy performance from a tight end in the history of fantasy football. So shout out to Big Hawk. He had a great game. I don't know if he sustains that moving forward with Amon-Ra and with the running back being out there, but he's going to have some good games with King Goff while those two are out. Shout out to TJ. Our flex for the week was Miles Sanders. He was the flex number 1. He had 28.6 points. He carried the ball 27 times for 134 yards and 2 tugs. He also had 2 receptions for 22 yards on 3 targets. So he had a good game over there for Philly. It was pretty rainy. Shout out to Miles Sanders for getting the flex number 1. Also, special shout out to Rashad Penny, who had 28.2 points. He just barely missed out on flex 1. I just wanted to shout you out there, Rashad, with your 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. What a baller. The defense of the week was the San Francisco 49ers on Monday night. They absolutely dunked on the Rams, dude. They had 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 1 fumble recovery, 7 sacks, and 9 points allowed. They only allowed 257 yards, and they put up 21 points. Great week for the 49ers. That defense was flying over the field. And for the best striker of the week, a.k.a. the best kicker, it goes to Greg Joseph, who in fitting form was in London town, where he put up 18 points on 3 field goals over 39 yards, 2 field goals over 49 yards, and 5 field goal attempts made. A proper outing for Greg Joseph. Well done, lad. And that takes us to our next segment, which is bench stars for the week. Not very many this week, but I'll shout out a few. The first one of ours comes from Mike Phillips, who had 15.9 points on the bench with Corey Davis. I don't believe he had anyone he could have started instead of him, except for Brandon Ayuk. But shout out to Corey Davis. He's been quietly good these past couple weeks. So 15.9 for Mike. For myself, shout out to King Goffrey himself, 31.1 points and QB2 on the week. He did really well. I did start Russell Wilson this week, and Russell Wilson actually didn't stink this week. He did put up 26.9, but that still wasn't enough to top ruler of all men, King Goffrey, first of his name, and breaker of chains. I also have to shout out Rachaad White on my bench, who put up 12.1. I mean, Javonte Williams did get hurt with and had 3.2 points. So I do want to shout out Rachaad White. I kind of picked him up in hopes that Leonard Fournette would tear his ACL. And I will be looking to find running back help on my bench moving forward. So maybe it's Rachaad White, maybe it's Chase Edmonds, who knows. Shout out to those two guys on my bench. Also shout out to Romeo Dubes, who put up 11.2 on my bench. Next, we're going to get into the Barack Obama ups. His bench MVP for the week was Justin Herbert, who put up 21.1 points to Joe Burrow's 20 points. I think it's evident that you need to start Justin Herbert moving forward, and you should look to offload Joe Burrow, preferably to my team. Matty Will, sorry to shout you out, big dog, but Pat Fryermuth, a.k.a. Muth City, put up 12 points on your bench to Kyle Pitts' 3.0 points. At some point, you're going to realize you can't start Kyle Pitts. Maybe it's this week. We don't know. Cordarrelle Patterson's out. We'll see. But I think it's time to sit down Big Kyle and to start Big Muth. All right, getting into the big hitters of the week, we look to Captain Phillips and Nuggets team, where he had J.K. Dobbins sitting on that bench with 20.3 points, compared to James Robinson's whopping 2.9 points that Nugget made sure he traded his best player for. That looks like a poor decision. We'll see how Nugget moves forward. Also, shout out to a friend of the show, Ramondre Stevenson, 10.9 points on Nuggets bench to Tony Pollard's 1.3. Next, we have Dan's team, and Dan didn't have too much on the bench, but I do want to shout out Tyler Lockett. He did have 10.1 points to Deontay Johnson's 3.2 points. I've said it 3 weeks in a row that he doesn't need to start Deontay Johnson. However, like I've said a few times, Kenny White Two Gloves is back next week, and I think that helps him out. We'll see how it goes. Looking at Nico's team, Nico didn't have much on the bench. He did have the Cowboys defense, who is a no-brainer against the Washington Commanders. Secret, go ahead and pick up whoever's playing Washington. They will have a minimum of 8 sacks. They had 10 points on the bench to the Steelers' 4. I don't think anyone saw the Jets coming, except for Tom, who played a defense against the Jets a few weeks ago. Next, we have Godin's Grinders, and this is a good one here. Kyle had RB1 and Josh Jacobs on the bench with 32 points. We talked about it last week with Kyle about how Josh Jacobs may not be the guy, and sure enough, he's the guy. 32 points on Kyle's bench. He did have 2 really good running back starts. I think his flex spot was decent as well. Kyle's team is going to be interesting seeing who he starts moving forward. Obviously, Terry McLaurin has been pretty disappointing for him so far. I don't know if he moves anyone else into that spot, really. I think you just kind of run with Terry McLaurin or look to trade him for someone, maybe some running back depth. We'll see how Kyle goes, but right now, Josh Jacobs on the bench. You hate to see it, Kyle. I'm sorry to see it for you, man. Next, we got Tom's team, and Tom did have Brandon Cooks on the bench with 15.2 points. Drake London only put up 2.7. That would have been a better start. However, Drake London had been flying up until last week, so none of us really saw that coming. I think Devontae Smith also only put up 3 points. So for Tom, you hate to see it. Brandon Cooks is going to be a tricky start every week. He's going to have to bounce that back and forth between all his wide receivers because now that he has Debo, that's a surefire lock every week, you know? Also have to shout out the best white running back in the league, not named Christian McCaffrey, and Rex Burkhead with 12.4 points to Jonathan Taylor's 2.8 points. Tom, I don't think will be tempted to start Jonathan Taylor next week as he will be out, and he will get to start one of 2 white running backs in the National Football League. Looking at Dan Wagon Fan, he did have Rashad Penny on his bench with 28.2 points. I don't think anyone but Rashad Penny saw that coming. Shout out to Rashad Penny, though, with 28.2 points on his bench. We mentioned it before. I think Dan Wagon has the best 3 running backs in the league. I don't know where Rashad Penny fits in on his team, but got to shout him out on the bench there, RB2 on the week. And looking at Zach's team, Zach had an overall pretty good week. I'm going to keep saying it until he does it. Damian Harris on the bench with 14.9 points. Outshines Cordarrelle Patterson with 9.8 points. Put that top 12 running back in your lineup. Good things will happen. Last team we're looking at is Jim, and Jim had a few players on the bench that did really well. Marquise Brown continues to have an overall pretty good season with 17.8 points. He could have started him over Pity City. Michael Pittman, who had 4.3 points. However, I do think that's an obvious start. I think Michael Pittman will do well. We got to shout out Hollywood Brown on the bench there collecting dust, as well as Kirk Cousins, who had 12.8 points on his bench. Kirk Cousins was absolutely mediocre across the pond in London. However, Matthew Stafford was even worse with 6.6 points. That's a tough decision every week. Matthew Stafford should get better. He did play really good defense in San Francisco. But, you know, Kirk Cousins, Every now and then he's going to have a game. He had a decent game, but, obviously that would have been the better start. Got to shout you out. All right, so looking into week 5, looking into some matchups, we'll start off with myself versus Captain Phillips. Probably one of the poopiest matchups of the week, and Nugget coming in at 0-4 and myself at 1-3. I lost Javonte Williams this week, so I do think this is a week where Nugget traps me and gets his first win. I apologize, Zach. You may not be able to talk crap this week. Currently, I'm coming in as a 10.6 point favorite. We'll see how that holds up against Nuggets' newly traded for offense here. However, some key injuries looking into it. I do have Keenan Allen, who was out this week. Maybe he starts for me next week. We don't know. Javonte Williams is out for the season. Nugget does have Fart Prescott on his bench. I don't know if he makes the start for him this week, as Trevor Lawrence has looked solid. However, we'll see who he does want to start. I think Trevor Lawrence gets a start for him, but I think it'll be a good matchup. I think Nugget will score more points than me, and I do think I will go to the worst team in the league after this week. Next game we have is the replacements versus Integrity Farm Towels. This is Matty Will versus Dan. And Dan's going to come in as a 1.4 point favorite. So this is a very, very close game. They see these guys as equals here. Matty Will did have Amon-Ra St. Brown out this week. He'll look to get him back next week, as that'll strengthen his lineup there. He may not have to start someone like Garrett Wilson. So Dan also has some Lions injuries. He has DeAndre Swift out, and he also has Zay Jones out from the Jacksonville Jaguars. However, looking at it on paper, Dan's team looks a lot better. Obviously, he has to start Cam Akers now, as Nugget traded it to him. This will be a good game. It looks to be even across the board. I can't really pull any strengths from either side. That'll be a good matchup to look into this week, but those guys will look to get the win. Next game we have is Golden Grinders versus Barack Obama. This is Kyle versus Colton. And both of these teams are coming in with decent records here. The line opens up at 9 points for Kyle, who is a 9-point favorite. Right now, it's showing Kyle has positional advantage everywhere except for wide receiver 1 and defense. No big injuries coming into this game. Both teams look healthy and ready to play. I do think this is a tighter matchup than 9 points. But we'll see how this plays out. I do think Colton's one of the stronger teams now that injuries have played into a lot of people's other teams. But Kyle also has a decent team too. We kind of down-talked his team last week and said he had a lot of middle-tier guys. But I'll tell you what, healthy middle-tier guys are better than hurt top-tier guys. And Kyle has a full healthy team, and he looks to beat Colton this week, and Colton looks to beat Kyle. I think that's the America's matchup of the week. Next game is Danwagon Fan versus AS St. Etienne, and this is Brando versus Nico, and the two guys with the O at the end of their name bowl. Currently, Nico's coming in as a 2.2 favorite. I don't know if this is as close as it looks to be. I do think that Nico has a positional advantage at every position. I'm going to keep down talking Brando every week until he loses, because I hate him in fantasy. Probably a great guy out of work. He looks like a great guy. I mean, I saw a picture of him fishing. He looks like a genuine nice guy. However, Brandon, I hope for your demise, and I hope that you lose every game moving forward, seeing as you're the reason my team is on a losing streak. I hope Nico gets this win. Brando, you can burn in hell. Next game we have is Colpo's second boyfriend versus Airsoft Thugs. This is Jim versus Mike. And currently, this is, a super close game. Jim comes in as a 0.2 point favorite. These guys look identical. Mike is going to come in undefeated. Jim is going to come in 2-2. However, I did have Jim as my champion this year. I do think his team is still one of the strongest teams out there. But Mike is proving me wrong. His team has been solid all year, and this will be a really good matchup. I take it back. This is America's best matchup of the week. Sorry, guys, before this. However, looking at injuries, Jim comes in with Michael Thomas out and Brian Robinson out, which is interesting because Mike has Antonio Gibson. I do think Brian Robinson will be activated this week onto Washington's team, and I think Brian Robinson will end up being RB1 over there. Seeing as I follow that team too close, I know Brian Robinson is going to be the RB1 over there. We'll see who Mike pivots to after Antonio Gibson gets the boot over there in Washington. Mike comes in with Alvin Kamara out. He was a scratch start this week. He still got the win against me, even though Kamara didn't play for him. Jacoby Myers is out. However, I don't think he would play Jacoby Myers even if he was in. Seeing as Bartholomew Littlefoot is the quarterback over there in New England, I don't think Jacoby gets a look either way. And Tua is on concussion protocol. He won't be Mike's starter. However, he has quarterback 1 on the season and Lamar Jackson starting for him. I don't think that's a hard decision. That'll be a good game. And last game of week 5 that we're looking into is Kareem Pie versus Tennessee State. This is Zach and Tom. I think we collectively all as a league hope that Zach loses this week and that Tom gets his first win back. I think Zach is starting to be the villain of the league, and I think we're all conspiring against him. However, looking into this week, Zach does have Cordero Patterson coming in on the injury reserve, as well as Mac Jones, who's going to be out potentially for a few weeks. Tom has David Montgomery, who is out this week. I don't know if he gets back this week. And then Elijah Mitchell, who was out on injury reserve earlier on this season. Tom also has Jonathan Taylor, who I don't know if Jonathan Taylor starts, but Jonathan Taylor is hurt. We'll see how Tom does in terms of finding running backs, because right now he's a little bit thin. I mentioned earlier that Rex Burkhead might get the look. We'll see if Tom looks for more running backs on the waiver wire. And on Zach's side of the things, Cordero Patterson's out, like I mentioned before. He does have top 12 running back Damian Harris. I think Damian gets the nod this week. We'll see how it goes. However, Zach has favored Michael Carter in the past. We'll see what decision he makes. Tom does come in as a 1-point favorite. This is a very close game on paper. We'll see how it plays out in real life, though. But that's all I got for you guys this week. Pretty short episode. I didn't get anyone in here with me. Hopefully next week I can get a few more of you guys in here so we can talk a bit more movement in the league and more trade talk and see if we can get this league mixed up. But having said that, I hope you guys have a great week 5. I will see you next week in week 6. Take care. Brush your hair. Peace.